Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. We're going to do part number 7. That's what we're up to now on the build tutorial. And there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff going on in this video. This will probably be one of the longer videos, so just let everybody know ahead of time. Where are we at? We are starting on the chassis assembly. And as we go along here, I'll be talking about some other things, also some questions that came up, some concerns that came up on the previous videos. So we'll work that all, in as we're building along. Like I say, we're going to start on the chassis. The one thing that I did notice about the chassis that, for me personally, I can't let go going into competition. And, it's something it's a pretty simple thing to fix. And I'm going to show you how to do it. And you can make the decision starting out as a beginner or, in first couple of models you've put together, whether you want to go this as far as, correcting things or not. But if you get up into competition, you're going to need to. So we're going to go ahead, and of course in step number 3 here we have the main frame rails. That's pretty much the biggest component out of all of them. Then we start hanging the front suspension. So I'm just going to look at the main frame right now, which is right here, and we're going to address a couple issues with that. Not really issues, but just basic stuff. The good thing that AMT did with this is there's no injector pin marks underneath on anything. That's a real good touch. They put the injector pin marks, up on top of the frame, back here inside the fuel tank, on top of the cross members, there's injector pin marks. So that's good because all that's facing up against the floor pan. So you don't really need to do anything with it. You can't see it. Even if you're going into competition, you can't see it. So the other nice thing that AMT done on this particular kit is normally on frames, you will end up with a parting line. It's actually a mold line that will go down the center of the frame rails. And AMT molded this one so that the parting line is actually right on this top edge of the frame rail all the way around. And that's good because you don't have to go in and do a whole lot of sanding on, getting the mold line out of the side of the frame. And the other thing that's nice about that is the outside of the frame's not bad to do that on. But when they have that mold line, it's also on the inside of the frame rail, from front to back. So that's a little bit more, tricky to get cleaned up. So that's one thing that's nice about the kit. Now, we do have a little piece sticking out here, and for the beginning guys, this is just some extra, it's part of the molding process. You'll see it sticking off of this spring mount out here. That gets cut off. And the way that I go about doing that is I just come in with my snippers, my sprue cutters, and I will snip that off, get rid of that piece. And I'll come in with the sanding stick and see, you can tell that this has a rounded edge on it there. I'll just take the sanding stick and come in and clean that up and make that nice and round again. And I've already done the other side before I started this video, so I went ahead and just cut, it cuts a little bit of time off the videos. But just clean it up with the sanding stick, reshape it on the outside there. You probably won't see a whole lot of this once everything's assembled. So, it's one of the things you probably wouldn't have to clean this up real good, but I'm not taking any chances on this. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it looks decent. And let's see what else we have. Okay, now I was talking about the mold line being on the top of the frame right here. And that is true. Now, when it gets to this little spring bracket, the mold line comes across it. It's actually in the center of it. So we're going to take the number 11 blade on the hobby knife, and we're just going to come in. We're going to do a little bit of scraping right there on that bracket. And we're going to clean that mold line off. Get that all cleaned up nice. And that will go all the way around. It'll also be on the front side. And this is one of the things that's very time consuming about a kit, is looking for all these little things that you need to address or that you should address. But you're going to have to do it on any kit out there. It doesn't matter who makes it. It's just one of those things that the prep work is, the prep work is what makes and breaks a model. Especially if you're going into competition. I mean, the basics are what makes a model get the first impression, not only to the judges but to the public also. So if you make sure you get all these steps done and keep practicing your basics and do them well, do them better each time, you'll turn out a decent model. So all we're doing now is just scraping out that mold line, getting that all cleaned up. Okay, we've got that. That looks pretty good. Now I'm just sighting down the frame, looking for any more issues. Now this was on a parts tree, so we have a little bit of cleanup right in this area, and we also have a little bit of cleanup back here where it was cut off the sprue. So other than that, everything else actually looks pretty good. Not too bad. Trying to see if there's a mold line on this round bar back here. I think there is a mold line on that round bar. Yep, it's right there. I see it. Took me a little bit to pick that up, but it's there. So we're going to go ahead and clean that up. And I guess while I'm doing this cleanup on this part here, y'all can kind of watch what's going on and what I'm doing. I'll touch on a little concern that came up by several people actually, talking about this series of tutorials that I'm doing. I set out to do this for the beginning guys, and I think there's some concern that I'm not doing all the steps on camera, and that is true. But something that you need to kind of think about with that is just like with the engine assembly, we didn't do all of that on camera as far as the putting all the pieces together. And if I had done it on camera, you'd be sitting through about a 4-hour video, something like that. And then you're talking about another at least a half an hour to upload that video. So, I'm trying to get as much of the basic information out there as I can to the newer guys, but I'm not going to be able to sit here and build the entire model on camera. It's just not going to happen. I don't have the time to do that, and I'm also not set up over like at the spray booth and stuff yet for shooting video over there. So I'd have to take everything from where it's at right now, where you're seeing it, and move everything, and that's just not something that I want to do right now. I'm just trying to help out the younger builders out there with basically learning how to put together a model kit and what to look for and things like that. So I'm trying to get as much information as I can to you, but I'm not going to be able to sit here and do everything on camera. And hopefully, that's not a deal breaker for a lot of guys that are watching it, but that's just the way it is. I wish I could record everything, but you guys would get bored, trust me. When you're sitting here doing this kind of stuff, hours on end, especially like on my big truck kits and stuff that I do, and all the scratch building. I mean, just to do one assembly, we're talking about, sometimes 10 or 20 hours just to do one assembly. And, people aren't going to sit on YouTube and watch that kind of stuff for that long. So, all right, well, I went ahead and I found that there was a little bit of a mold line across this drive shaft loop right here. So we got that cleaned up. And now I'm looking at the back of the transmission cross member. There's also a mold line in there. So I'm just doing the same procedure, just using the number 11 blade as a scraper and scraping that mold line out. Getting everything as smooth as we can get it. And of course, like I say, always check, because if you have a mold line on the backside, most likely 98% of the time you're going to have a mold line on the front side. So definitely check both sides of everything. And that's why I say this video is going to be a little bit longer, because I am going to sit here and do some of this on camera, just to show guys the steps that I'm going through. And it takes time, and it's For me, it would be kind of boring to sit and watch a video of somebody doing the same thing just time after time after time. And like on the engine, when we was gluing the engine together, I glued the block together, the heads, the front timing cover, the oil pan, the bell housing, and the transmission. And I made mention in there that, the rest of the parts of the engine are the same process. It's the same cleanup. It's the same things to look for. And then the procedures as far as gluing all that together is the same as the ones that we showed on camera. So I'm trying to, do my best with it here. So, don't be too hard on me. um, but we are doing this for the younger guys and, for the beginning builders and the intermediate builders, and hopefully it helps them out and gives them some good pointers that they can use to, really enjoy the hobby. So, all right, I've got, actually, I got one more, actually two more. The cross members here on the front also have mold lines in them. And some of these you probably would not, if you're not going into competition, you probably would not have to mess with these. But the one thing that I like to stress is if you're going to start out in model building, and you want to one of these days build, high quality models, you want to learn the basics and you want to do them from the very beginning. So that way you're not getting any bad habits on, skipping this and skipping that. And then later on, you get used to that and you just, oh, I'm not going to mess with that mold line, or I'm not going to mess with that sink mark. Um, and that's fine in areas that you can't see those things. But out here in the open on frame rails and stuff like that, if you was to put a model into competition, um, you know, the judges are going to see it. That's the thing. And if you get into that bad habit where it just comes natural to you that you skip over that stuff, you're not going to be very successful in the competition world if that's the way you want to go. If you don't ever want to compete and you just want to build models to have fun and pass time, you can do this or you can skip this step. Um, it's all up to you. But I'm going to show you the steps here, on how to go about cleaning this stuff up. And if people want to use it, that's great. I highly recommend that you know, pay attention to all these procedures and make sure that you're doing them on every build that, you put together. Don't do it on one and then skip it on the next, because you get into that bad habit and, that's not a good thing. So we're still scraping mold lines. Fun, fun, fun. But I'm almost done, I think. That's all the cross members pretty much cleaned up. And then we're going to show you another little trick that I do to make the frame rails look a little bit better. Okay, we've got all that cleaned up now. Gee, wasn't that exciting? I've been sitting here for how long? We are 13 minutes into this video scraping on a frame. Let's see. I see a few more spots right here on the inside of the frame that leads down to that cross member. So we're going to get those areas scraped down. And of course, it's another mold line. And like I say, sometimes you can do a little bit of pre-fitting and you can kind of figure out if there's a component that's going to cover up some of these spots. And if that's the case during, final assembly or whatever, something covers it up, then you really don't have to mess with it, because if you can't see it, it's, why spend the time to really go and do it if you can't see it? That's kind of my mentality on that. A lot of people aren't like that. I've got a friend, actually comes out for the 24-hour build and stuff, Pete Scruggs. He's one of those people that'll take an injector pin mark out from underneath of a seat, and that's cool. I mean, that's dedication. But me personally, that seat's going to be glued in the car. There's no judge in the world that can see underneath of it. If it has 100 injector pin marks in it, they're going to stay in it because you can't see them. But he's the opposite when it comes to that. He'll sit there and spend hours upon hours cleaning that stuff up. And when it's all said and done, you can't even see it. But he enjoys doing it that way. And that's, that's cool. Not me. I have a hard enough time getting them done sometimes, let alone doing stuff that you can't see when the model's finished. And what I've got down in this cross member here is a little bit of a raised injector pin mark, and I'm using a hobby knife to cut that out. And I've got the other mold line on the inside of the frame over here, and I hope that's about it. It looks like it. Now I forgot where I was. Oh, I know where I'm at. I'm scraping on a mold line on the inside of the frame. That unless you display this on a mirror, you're not going to see it. Because in the case of my builds, most of them are crystal cleared with white glue to the display board. So the judges can't pick them up and look underneath of them. Even though I go through all this work, a lot of times, the only thing they can see if they slide a mirror underneath of it. But they will do that. So I got to make sure I got my bases covered. Okay, I've got all the mold lines cleaned up now for the most part. I think that looks like all of them. And I'm kind of looking over some things here. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is where this mold line runs along the top of the frame rails, there's a real sharp edge on there. So I'm going to take the sanding stick and I'm going to clean up the side of the frame rails a little bit. Like right here, we have an attachment point where it was on the sprue. So we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of sanding on that and clean that up. And then we're going to sand down the side of the frame here. Whole lot of sanding, a whole lot of prep work. Anybody gets into building models, if doing this type of stuff is not your cup of tea, then probably building models is not going to be your cup of tea either, because there's a lot of time that goes into just the basic stuff, and it's boring. I mean, it's the same thing over and over and over again on every kit you do. But that's for a lot of us, that's kind of what makes it fun too, even though it's boring. Doing these procedures like this, we know when it's done, it's going to be a decent model and it's going to look the part that, we want it to look, and we continue to do it for some reason or another. So like I say, I'm just cleaning up the edges of the frame rail or the sides of the frame rails and where that mold line runs along the top edge of the frame rail. We're getting all that cleaned up. And I'll do that all the way around the frame. We'll move over to this side, do the same thing. And this kit has one of the things that I really can't stand in a kit. And as soon as I get this sanded down a little bit more here, I'm going to show everybody what I'm talking about. Revell does it. A lot of the manufacturers do it. It drives me crazy because it just creates a lot more work for, something that you would figure they would go ahead and just close in to begin with, but they don't. So as modelers, we have to fix it. Okay. Now, like I say, I'm not going to sit here and do everything on camera in front of you, but I've cleaned up pretty much the outside of the frame rails, this line across the top here where the mold line was. Now, remember, it's also on the inside. So we have to go on the inside of the frame rails and get all those sanded out. But I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to do that off camera, but you've seen the steps on how I go about doing the outside. The inside's the same way. One little trick that I do is on these frame rails, it has a rolled edge on the bottom of it here. When the sides come down and go underneath, it's kind of a nice, rolled edge. But up here on top, it's not. And a lot of times what happens with that, when you have a real sharp angle like that, depending on what paint color you're using, it wants to pull away from this edge. So one of the little tricks that I do on all that is I will take my number 11 blade and I will actually lay at an angle on the top edge of that frame rail, and I'll just slide it back and forth. And what I'm doing is actually creating a rolled edge on the top of the frame rail to match the bottom. And when you do that, it not only looks a lot better, but it will retain the paint a lot better when you go to spray it. And like I say, that depends on what color you're spraying it. Like if you're spraying a yellow or something like that, yellows always tend to pull away from the high points or the sharp edges. So if you go ahead and roll that now, it takes care of all that. And real easy to do. And most of the time I'll come back in with the sanding stick and I'll just lightly go over it and make sure that I've got it rolled pretty evenly all the way down. So I will continue that on all of the upper parts of the frame rail. So that's something I'll do off camera, but you get the idea. Okay, now for the little thing, the little gripe that I have on some kits, but like I say, it's just one of those things that, you know, it is what it is, and we just have to go with it and learn how to fix it. But if you look at the top of the frame rails here, you can see that there is a channel in them. They're open, and this would be a boxed frame on this car, or that's what they're simulating, but the top of the rails are open. Now, how I find out if I need to fix that or not and make it look like a complete frame rail is I will set the frame into place on the chassis pan. And of course, from basically this point right here, all the way back here, you can't see the top of the frame rail, so it doesn't matter. But when you flip the kit over and you sight down through the engine bay there, see the hollow rails? That doesn't look too much like a frame rail to me. If it was a C channel, the frame rails, the C would be on the inside. I can get the camera to focus in. There it is. You can see those hollowed out frame rails, and also the cross members hollowed out. But the cross member, for the most part, is going to have the engine over top of it. So we may not even mess with that. But from this point out to here, the frame rails are hollow. So I can't have that on one of my builds. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to take our Tamiya white putty. And there's two different ways to do this. As far as this build, I'm going to do it with the putty because this is the quickest and not really the easiest way. But for the beginners out there that want to try this technique, it's the easiest way. So we're just going to take the Tamiya putty and we're going to fill the top of this frame rail in. We're going to fill all that groove in, and then when all this dries up and we sand it out, it'll look like a boxed frame rail the way that it should. And I'm only coming back here to about the transmission cross member because, like I say, it sits up against the floor pan. So from that point on, you won't see it. So we're not going to mess with the rest of it. Now, my buddy Pete I was talking about, he would fill that thing all the way through. And that's what makes him happy. He likes doing stuff like that. And, you know, if you want to practice or whatever, if you're doing it for the first time and you want to fill back further, hey, go for it. But you don't really have to. You don't even have to fill this in, really, unless you're picky like I am. Okay, we got that filled in. Now I'm going to have to get a little tool out here to do one little spot. Yeah, get the right one. There we go. I've got a set of these little spatula things that came from, I think these came from Hobby Lobby. And they come in real handy for doing filler sometimes. You can scoop a little bit on the end of it here. And right here against this spring bracket that sticks out, you can put the filler on the end of that tool, on that spatula, and put it in there just like that. And it makes it a lot cleaner than taking your finger and trying to run all the way up there, because then it goes up the side of this bracket right here. So when you have to sand all that back out, you not only have to sand the top of the frame rail, but the bracket and clean all that up. So if you keep your putty, under control when you're putting it on, as much as you can, you won't have all that extra cleanup when you get ready to sand it all out. So another little trick there for everybody to remember. And most of the time, I just apply the white putty, or any putty for that matter, straight out of the tube, unless I'm using something that's a two-part putty. But I just use the tube itself to put it on. But I'm doing this step as far as filling it in, just to show you how I go about doing it. As this shrinks down a little bit, I may have to go put another coat on, but we'll do that off camera so we don't bore you too bad with that. A lot of people don't like this putty. I'm a big fan of it. I have real good luck with it. If you're wanting a fairly inexpensive putty that works well, I recommend the Tamiya white putty. Like I said, in one of the videos I made mention on the Squadron, I have the Squadron putty, the white and the green over here. And I think at one time I had a gray. And, it works. It's just a little bit too grainy for me. It takes a lot more primer, I think, to get everything to smooth out that you've put putty on. And the Tamiya stuff is like real smooth when it dries. So a little bit less sanding, I guess you could say. And as you can see, I'm applying it, straight out of the tube. That's the way I do it most of the time. It does make a little bit of a mess on the end of the tube, but I'll show you here real quick how I take care of that. And one thing about putty is you don't want to put too much on. A lot of guys will put a whole bunch of putty on, trying to not have to fill a second time. You can do that to a certain extent, but be careful, because if you get too much on, that is lacquer based and it will melt the plastic, and you don't want that. And to clean my tube up, what I usually do is just take a piece of cloth when I'm done with my filling session, and I will just make sure that I wipe the tip of it off there, and also the threads, and get that back to being clean again. Hold it up here and let you see it. That's pretty clean there. There's a little bit in that top thread, but when you thread this on, it'll knock that right out of there. And now your tube's ready to go for the next time around. So that's another little trick that we're wanted to show you. But where we have that filled in, I'll go ahead and set the frame underneath of here just to show you what's going on with that part. Now we get the camera to focus. You can see where we filled it. Come on, camera, focus in. There we go. And once we get all that sanded down, we'll now have a boxed in frame rail that looks like it should. And like I say, once you get the motor and stuff in here and the headers hanging down, the suspension, radiator, things like that, you probably won't see a lot of that area, but I know I'll be able to see some of it. And if that's the case, so will the judges. So that's what we're doing as far as the frame. And in another video, I made mention that as I was doing, putty work and things like that, I went ahead and found a sink mark in the fuel cell here. The top half of it, the bottom half of the fuel cell is already molded in. And now that all this is dried up, we're going to go in and sand this down just to clean this up. And this is the kind of stuff that I do in between, bigger assemblies or whatever. If I've got stuff drying, or I'm, got to go over and paint something and I'm just kind of idle, I guess you could say, I'll go ahead and do stuff like this. Sand these parts down and get them ready to go. So we're looking good there. We have that sanded out. So the top of the fuel cell is pretty much ready to go into primer. I'm going to go to a little bit lighter grid here just to get some of them scratches out. And I'm hoping we're getting ready to move everything out of the spray booth area, that room over there. Well, not much of a room. It's only 12 by 4. But we're going to move everything out of there. So hopefully when I get to priming and painting on the chassis itself, we might go ahead and set the camera up over there. So we went ahead and cleaned up the back of the fuel cell there. Got that prepped and ready to go for the next step. And I think, I'm not sure if that fuel cell goes in that way or if it goes in the other way. Let me take a gander here at the instructions. Nope, it goes the other way. I was backward. Yeah, a lot of people told me I've been backward. I guess they were right. There we go. Goes in, from what they're showing, goes in just like that. So we've got that all cleaned up. Now all we got to do is glue that into place. And when we get everything else prepped on this chassis, we'll go ahead and do the primering on that. And another thing, I thought I was done with the mold lines. There's another one right here on the inside of the frame, and also one that leads into this cross member that we cleaned up, both sides. So I have to go in and clean that up too. So that'll be something we'll do off camera. But that's the chassis for the most part. That's the steps, to go about cleaning them up. And then another thing that we can do while we have this video at about 31 minutes right now, when I'm working on stuff like that and I'm letting putty set up or whatever on that certain sub assembly, I'll go in and find something else that's a two-piece part that I need to glue together. So in that case, we're going to go ahead and snip the rear end off of here. And this is not a step that we're doing in, where are we at here? Step 3. We're not doing the rear end in step 3, but this is just something that I do to, keep moving forward with my builds. All right, let's see how much cleanup work we got on this thing. Shouldn't be too bad, really. Just have to clean it up where I snipped it off the parts tree there. And of course, we're back to just scraping with the blade. That's my favorite tool for doing this. They make what they call a seam scraper that some people use. I've tried them, and I still prefer my number 11 blade over them. I work with this knife and this blade so much. I finally found this is one of the Excel handles. It's very comfortable. The blade is balanced nice. Once you get used to a tool, stick with it. Don't keep trying to change around. If you're having good luck with that tool, keep using it. I'm not a person that likes to change a whole lot of stuff. It's just like a technique or a procedure that I'm doing. Once I learn how to do something and I know in competition it works, I will continue to do that. I usually don't change. All right, so we got the third member cleaned up there. Now on the rear end, of course, you're going to have a mold line that runs right through the center, top and bottom. So that's something that you're going to have to get cleaned up. And we're back to the number 11 and just scraping again. You don't want to scrape this too hard because you don't want to create a flat spot in the tube, in the housing tubes. So take your time and just, scrape that light, get rid of that mold line. You can use a piece of sandpaper if you want to. Some people like to do it that way. I prefer to do it with the hobby knife, but you can use sandpaper to do this. Try the hobby knife if that's not, and try the sandpaper. And if you like the sandpaper better and it works and it's getting the mold line out and it works better for you, go for it. For me personally, I like the hobby knife. And of course, here we are back to doing the same exact thing that we were doing on the chassis. And that's kind of the thing that I was saying, a lot of this stuff is just repetitive. It's the same thing, even though it's a different part or, a different sub-assembly on the model, it's all the same procedures. So that's why I'm not doing everything on camera, because it will get boring. There's guys out there right now that I guarantee are bored with this video. There's guys out there that cut this video off 15 minutes ago. And sometimes that's it makes it a little bit difficult to do videos like this, knowing that people are only going to watch half of it. But I'm doing this because I've been asked by the community, a lot of people in the community to do it. So that's why I'm doing it. But it does take time. It takes time for the uploads. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes when you're doing videos, and you have to try to keep 3,700 subscribers happy. There's a lot involved in it. You guys that have a lot of subscribers on your list, you know about it. It's a lot to keep up with. Not complaining at all. I'm kind of humbled that I have 3,700 people that have subscribed to my channel, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot to keep up with, and trying to comment, on everybody's comment, or do a like, or something like that. It gets hectic sometimes. I was going through my page last night, and I had like, I don't know how many comments it was, but I ended up doing like, on my screen, I scrolled down like 3 times where it says show more. Like 3 times I scrolled down to read more comments and comment on those comments. So it's a lot involved in it. But I'm trying to show as much of the stuff that I can here on on video, for all you guys. So bear with me. I'm just a dumb old modeler that found YouTube and found the modeling community, and just trying to get some decent information out there for people. Okay, now I've got to check on one thing on that, is the orientation, because I'm not sure. This looks like an offset rear end. So I'm going to go to the instructions here and see which side the rear end is offset to. So those mounts there are going to go forward, and then they want the third member offset to the right. Okay, so we've got both of those components cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of the thicker Tamiya cement onto the rear end itself. And I haven't asked everybody out there that's been watching the series, what do you think of the camera angle? Is it better than what we had before at Showtime Studios? Could it be better, or is there some tips or tricks that people can give me on I guess lighting and camera and stuff like that? I'm doing the best with what I have, but if somebody has an idea that I can try, we might give it a whirl and see if we can make it a little bit better. So I got that glue down. I'm going to go around now and just put a little bead of the Tamiya extra thin around this. That cleaned up. Okay, we've got the rear end pretty much assembled. Still have to slide the brakes on here, and of course put the 4-link bars and stuff like that on. But we got the third member glued in. We got the mold lines cleaned up top and bottom. So this is pretty much ready to go for the other components, and then go into primer. So that's just something that I do in between when I'm letting things dry up. You can do that. One of the next steps that'll be coming up, you can go to the next step in your instructions, or a couple of steps ahead, and look at what parts are coming up. If you have something drying up, like in step 3 here, if you're working on this frame and you've got putty up here like we do, that's drying up, go ahead and flip your page over and see what's coming up next. Like we did the rear end, we got that glued together and ready, and you have the exhaust coming up in the following step. So you can go in and do the mold lines and everything on the exhaust, and it just kind of makes it a little bit more efficient, kills some time, and keeps you moving forward. So that's about all we've got for this video. I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off. We're at about 40 minutes now, and we will probably put another one up tonight on, I don't know, something, probably working on the front suspension. So we'll get the putty dried up on the front of the frame here. We'll get that sanded down, and then we can start with the front suspension, getting it on. And I'll be doing something that's a little bit, it's one of those things a lot of people say you can't do, but we're going to do it. I'll show you how it works, and it'll come out great. So stay tuned for that. So that's all we've got for this one. Like always, if you got any questions or concerns, leave me a comment on the video. And I want to thank everybody for watching and all the support of this series. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.